This is a recording of the presentation that will be given at the public hearings on Horseshoe Crab Draft Addendum 8, which considers implementing the recommended changes from the 2021 Adaptive Resource Management Revision and Peer Review Report. This presentation will include an overview of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, a timeline for the development of this addendum, background information on the Adaptive Resource Management Framework, the objective of the addendum, proposed management options, and information on providing public comment. The Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission was formed in 1942, and it's comprised of the 15 states on the Atlantic coast. The states of Massachusetts through Florida participate in the management of horseshoe crab. The Atlantic Coastal Fisheries Cooperative Management Act charges the Commission to create fishery management plans to provide for the conservation of coastal fishery resources. Through this act, the Commission has regulatory authority over fisheries in state waters. The Horseshoe Crab Management Board works through quarterly meetings where each state is represented by 3 commissioners, and each state gets 1 vote in the decision-making process. This is the timeline for the development of Draft Addendum 8. The Management Board initiated the Draft Addendum in January of 2022. In August 2022, the Board approved Draft Addendum 8 for public comment. The comment period will extend until September 30th, with 4 public hearings scheduled in September. Following the comment period, the Board will review all public comments and consider final approval of the addendum at its next meeting in November of 2022. To provide some context for this proposed action, the Adaptive Management Framework, known as the ARM, has been used since 2013 to manage horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay region. The ARM framework is a multi-species approach to managing the horseshoe crab bait fishery. It considers both shorebird and horseshoe crab abundance levels in order to provide optimized harvest levels for Delaware Bay origin horseshoe crabs. Annually, the ARM provides an optimal bait harvest level for male and female horseshoe crabs to maintain the crab fishery, as well as provide sufficient resources to maintain viable populations of red knots, migratory shorebirds that are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, and which rely on the horseshoe crab eggs as a major food source in the Delaware Bay. The ARM was developed through a collaborative process with the Commission, state, and federal partners, including horseshoe crab and shorebird biologists, with the goal of ensuring that the abundance of horseshoe crabs does not become a factor limiting the population growth of red knots. Therefore, the objective of the ARM framework is to manage harvest of horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay to maximize harvest, but also to maintain ecosystem integrity, provide adequate stopover habitat for migrating shorebirds, and ensure that the abundance of horseshoe crabs is not limiting the red knot stopover population or slowing recovery. In 2021, the ARM underwent a revision and independent peer review process through which the ARM was updated to address some of the peer review critiques that were made about the original ARM framework, include new data sources to improve the models, and also adopt a new modeling software. One reason for the revision is that the ARM framework was originally developed in 2012. Since then, 10 more years of data have been collected for horseshoe crabs and red knots in the Delaware Bay region, which were used to improve the population models used in the ARM. Additionally, the software used to run the original ARM models is no longer functional on current operating systems, and the models cannot be updated with new parameters. This results in a management process that is no longer adaptive to new information. Thus, the revision was needed to transition to new modeling software, and it also allowed for new modeling approaches that incorporate uncertainty on life history parameters for horseshoe crabs and red knots. The board accepted the ARM revision and peer review in January of 2022. The independent peer review panel endorsed the ARM revision as the best available science for managing Delaware Bay horseshoe crabs. Therefore, the board also initiated Addendum 8 to consider using the revised ARM in setting annual specifications for horseshoe crabs of Delaware Bay origin. This slide shows the conceptual model of the ARM framework. The ARM involves linked population models for both horseshoe crabs and Rufa red knots, which incorporate survey data for both species. During the ARM revision, improvements were made to the horseshoe crab population dynamics model and the red knot population dynamics model, and the relationship between those two, with more years of data specific to the Delaware Bay region. However, the conceptual model of horseshoe crab abundance influencing red knot survival and reproduction has been maintained to ensure the abundance of horseshoe crabs does not become a limiting factor for the population growth of red knots. Now we'll cover the proposed management options included in Horseshoe Crab Draft Addendum 8. The draft addendum considers two management options. Option A is no action, and option B is to adopt the ARM revision for setting bait harvest specifications for the Delaware Bay. For option A, the no action option was used because true status quo is not an option due to the fact that the previous software the ARM model was run on is now outdated and cannot be updated. This means it is no longer adaptive resource management. Therefore, if no action is taken, management would revert back to the provisions under Addendum 6 to the Horseshoe Crab FMP. Option B would incorporate all of the changes recommended in the 2021 ARM revision and peer review in terms of data and model updates, but the general methodology for how the optimal harvest output from the ARM framework is allocated among the 4 Delaware-based states would use the same methodology. We will cover what the proposed changes are later in the presentation. Under option B, there are also two sub-options. These sub-options are related to rounding down the optimal harvest provided by the ARM in order to protect confidential data used to calculate the optimal harvest. Under option A, if no action is taken on this addendum, management would revert back to the provisions of Addendum 6. That means the horseshoe crab bait quotas for the 4 states of New Jersey through Virginia would go back to what they were before 2013, which are shown in this table. While New Jersey is allocated quota by the Commission, New Jersey has prohibited commercial harvest of horseshoe crabs in state waters since 2006. In addition to the quotas, the provisions of Addendum 6 prohibit directed harvest and landing of all horseshoe crabs in New Jersey and Delaware from January 1st through June 7th, and it prohibits female horseshoe crab harvest in New Jersey and Delaware for the remainder of the year from June 8th through December 31st. It also prohibits the landing of horseshoe crabs in Virginia from federal waters from January 1st through June 7th. It mandates that no more than 40% of Virginia's annual quota may be harvested east of the coal regs line in ocean waters, and it also requires that horseshoe crabs harvested east of the coal regs line and landed in Virginia must be comprised of a minimum male to female ratio of 2 to 1. Alternatively, option B would adopt the changes that were recommended in the 2021 ARM revision, and going forward, the revised ARM would be used for setting specifications for bait harvest of Delaware Bay origin horseshoe crabs. Option B addresses each of the aspects that were established in Addendum 7 related to how harvest specifications are set. These include the possible harvest recommendations from the ARM, the adaptive management cycle, the percent of each state's harvest that is of Delaware Bay origin, state allocations, and the fallback options. On the first issue, harvest recommendations, the addendum proposes that the revised ARM would be used to annually provide optimal harvest levels for males and females. The maximum number of males and females that can be provided by the ARM are the same as before at 500,000 males and 210,000 females. The main difference from the original ARM is that the revised ARM now produces sex-specific harvest levels on a continuous scale, meaning the optimal harvest recommendation can be any of the numbers between 0 and the maximum amount of males or females. For this issue, there are two sub-options that would take the optimal harvest output for each sex and round it down to the nearest 25,000 or 50,000 crabs. Rounding the harvest recommendation to some degree is necessary because Delaware-based specific biomedical data, which is confidential, will be input into the model. Rounding the harvest output would protect these data by preventing back calculation of the biomedical mortality inputs. Sub-option B1 is to round the optimal harvest down to the nearest 25,000 crabs. This will generally result in a harvest recommendation that is closer to the optimal harvest level. And sub-option B2 is to round down to the nearest 50,000 crabs and would generally result in a more conservative harvest recommendation. If the ARM were to recommend the maximum harvest level for either males or females, rounding would not be required because it would not be possible to back calculate the confidential data. This table shows what the harvest recommendations for 2017 through 2019 would have been if they had been produced with the revised ARM. In these examples, the population model, or CSMA estimates, were produced using the coast-wide biomedical mortality rather than the Delaware Bay specific biomedical data. These are not confidential. This also means the numbers here are most likely a slight overestimate of what the optimal harvest would be if the Delaware Bay specific biomedical data were used. You can see here that in each of these years, the revised ARM would have recommended the maximum amount of male harvest and a varying amount of female harvest around 150,000 crabs. For comparison, in each of these 3 years, the original ARM recommended the same harvest package in every year, which was 0 females and 500,000 males. This slide shows an example of how sub-options B1 and B2 would be used to round down the optimal harvest value using the 2019 optimal harvest recommendation from the last slide as an example. In the lower 2 tables, you can see what each of the 2 sub-options for rounding would produce for the harvest recommendations. Under sub-option B1, the optimal female harvest of 144,803 crabs would be rounded down to 125,000 crabs. Under sub-option B2, the optimal female harvest would be rounded down to 100,000 crabs. As mentioned previously, the male harvest would not be rounded down because it's already limited to the 500,000 maximum. Therefore, the confidential data could not be back calculated. The second item under option B is the management process for using the ARM framework. It is modified slightly from Addendum 7 to more clearly describe each step of the short and long-term management processes and ARM revision processes. Under option B, a 3-level process would be adopted, including an annual management process, interim update process, and revision process. The annual management process is that the ARM framework would be used annually to provide the optimal harvest levels for the upcoming fishing year. The interim update process is that every 3 years, the model parameters, which include things like red knot survival and recruitment rates and the horseshoe crab stock recruitment relationship, would be updated based on the most recent years of data for the Delaware Bay region. The third level would be a revision process occurring every 9 or 10 years. This process would be similar to the revision process that occurred for the 2021 ARM revision. The 9 to 10 year timeline allows for 2 interim updates to occur and encompasses 1 generation for horseshoe crabs. The third issue under option B is the proportion of each state's horseshoe crab harvest that is assumed to be of Delaware Bay origin. This value is called lambda. The 2021 ARM revision and peer review report recommended updates to the lambda values for each state based on the most recent genetic data. The new lambda values are slightly lower for Maryland and Virginia, and Delaware and New Jersey would remain unchanged. These lambda values affect the state-by-state allocations of the overall Delaware Bay quota. Here you can see the current lambda values used in the original ARM on the left compared with the proposed updated lambda values on the right. The fourth issue is the methodology for calculating the state allocations of the total Delaware Bay harvest. Under option B in Addendum 8, the only change to the allocation methodology from Addendum 7 is that the updated lambda values would be used, which results in new allocation weights for each state. With this change, the new state allocations of the Delaware Bay harvest limit would be those shown in the top right table. The allocations of the Delaware Bay harvest for New Jersey and Delaware slightly increase, while the allocations for Maryland and Virginia slightly decrease. The other 2 aspects of state allocations, which are the harvest cap provision and the 2-to-1 male-female offset provision, would remain status quo from Addendum 7. The harvest cap for Maryland and Virginia limits the total level of allowed harvest by those 2 states in order to provide protection to crabs that are not of Delaware Bay origin. The caps, which are shown in the bottom table, were based on the Addendum 6 quota levels for Maryland and Virginia. These caps do not apply when the ARM framework outputs an optimal harvest of 0 female crabs. The 2-to-1 offset only applies when the ARM recommends 0 female horseshoe crab harvest for the Delaware Bay. When the recommended female harvest is 0, then this provision allows a 2-to-1 offset of males to females, which means the total male harvest allocation of Maryland and Virginia is increased at a 2-to-1 ratio and allowed to rise above the cap level. This only applies to Virginia's quota for horseshoe crabs harvested east of the Coleridge line. For comparison, the state allocations under Addendum 7 using the original lambda values are shown on the right, and the proposed allocations resulting from the updated lambda values are shown on the left. This is an example of how the optimal harvest for the Delaware Bay would be allocated. In this example, the harvest levels from 2019 are used, which are rounded to 100,000 females and 500,000 males. The allocations among the 4 states is shown in the lower table. Again, this is only the Delaware Bay portion of the state quotas. Maryland and Virginia also have horseshoe crab quota for crabs that are not of Delaware Bay origin. On this slide, the Delaware Bay origin quotas for each state using the revised allocations are shown on the left in blue, and the total quotas, which include non-Delaware Bay origin crabs, are shown on the right in orange. The quotas for Delaware and New Jersey are the same on both sides because 100% of their harvest is Delaware Bay origin, while Maryland and Virginia's overall quotas, which are shown in red font, are greater than their Delaware Bay only quotas, accounting for additional crabs in their harvest that are not of Delaware Bay origin. In this example, it should also be noted that the harvest caps for Maryland and Virginia are being applied because there is female harvest recommended in this example. The last item addressed under option B is the fallback options for how harvest would be set if the ARM cannot provide an optimal harvest output in a given year. Option B includes the same fallback options included in Addendum 7. If in a given year there is not enough data for the model to produce a harvest recommendation, the next year's harvest may be set either based on the Addendum 6 quotas and management measures for New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland and Virginia, or harvest can be based on the previous year's ARM framework harvest level and allocation for the 4 states. The full draft addendum document can be found on the Commission's website at www.asmfc.org/about-us/public-input. The Commission has scheduled 4 public hearings to gather public input on draft addendum 8. If you would like to provide public comments, you can attend any of the virtual public hearings or attend the Virginia public hearing in person. For more information on attending a public hearing, visit www.asmfc.org/calendar or contact Caitlin Starks, FMP coordinator at cstarks@asmfc.org. If you'd like to submit written comments on this action, you can send them by mail or email to the addresses listed here. Comments can be emailed to comments@asmfc.org using the subject line Horseshoe Crab Draft Addendum 8. You can mail comments to the Commission's office at the following address: 1050 North Highland Street, Suite 200A-N, Arlington, Virginia 22201. The deadline for public comments is 11:59 p.m. on September 30th, 2022. Comments received after this time will not be considered by the board.